So this is an off the cusp episode. Yeah, yesterday morning woke up and was feeling like an absolute bag of shit. Our 2-year-old son had the flu 2 nights ago, so he had been waking up in the middle of the night puking, and that's a tough thing to go through being a parent. And the next day he woke up, I was picking him up from his mom's, and he was chugging water, and he started to puke, and then he was laughing after. And I don't know, it was kind of funny. It was kind of like a mixed emotion. It was funny, and then it was also like a little bit scary. And I'm going to come back to that story because there's something that I learned from him. Later that day, realized that both my ex and I both had that flu, which turned out to be a 24-hour flu. It sounds like it was a Norwalk virus, so it's the kind of flu where you're like, you need to muster up the fucking energy to be able to stand up. And there were times where I was like, standing up is literally too exhausting, and I'd get to the point where I'd be like crouched on the couch, and then I'd be like, I need to make it to the kitchen, which is like 15 feet. And I'd like take 20 minutes to get to the kitchen, and then I'd be on the floor again. And, as terrible of an experience as it was, there were certain moments that I thought about my son during those times, and we were trying to look after him at this time. And it's really challenging to look after a 2-year-old who's not sick, because he had the 24-hour flu, and then we had the 24-hour flu the day after. It's really hard to feel good about parenting when you take 30 minutes to get to another room in a house, and our son wanted to play and wanted to do stuff because he was feeling a lot better. But there was a time where I was at my house, and I woke up. This is the day after he had the flu. I woke up, and as soon as I was waking up, I was still in bed. I noticed, I was like, wow, my stomach actually feels really strange. Like, feels like I need to shit, or feels like I need to puke. And I'm like, that's not a normal feeling at all. So I got up. The night before, I had scheduled in a workout. I was like, I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. I'm going to do this hard workout, part of training. Felt really committed. And I woke up and I was like, this feels really off. This feels this feels weird. So, and I'm really glad that I listened to my body. I checked in. So, I went into the workout space, thought about working out. I just couldn't get myself to it. And that's really, really uncommon. And so I found myself kind of wandering around. It was like 5:15 in the morning. And I was like, just sort of wandering around the house. I was like, I can't really I feel so, I don't feel inclined to do any type of workout. So I was like, you know what, maybe I'll just do some yoga. And I threw on this 20-minute yin yoga practice, and I started doing that. And even that, I was like, I can't even do this. I'm like, this feels too hard. This feels like I don't want to do this. So I did I don't know, maybe 10 minutes of a yin yoga practice. And yin yoga is very light yoga. So I was like, okay, well, at least I tried that. And then, so then I went to the washroom, and I did have to puke. And while I was puking, I puked 7 times. And I remember while I was puking, I thought of my son laughing after he was puking. And there was this real present sense of being with the discomfort, maybe you call it pain, whatever, the discomfort of puking, and then also feeling some just some absolute presence with it, and some acceptance, and some almost some humor, like my son did. And I have to, I sort of have to thank him for that, because, usually when I don't know, it's not often that I'm sick, that I'm vomiting, but like I think it was 3 years before that was the last time I had the flu, and it was a very similar flu out both ends. So I think it is the Norwalk virus. I believe it's called that. But there was just, I'm so grateful that I learned that from him, because it was just this like real acceptance of, this is the discomfort, this is what your body's going through. And it was like no big deal. It was like, yeah, I'm puking, and yeah, my body needs to get rid of this, and yeah, this is what I'm experiencing. But it was like very much that. It was like not so much, complaining about how terrible I feel. And yeah, I'm really grateful. I think that was we can learn a lot from kids. And I now know from having one that, we have those experiences so much more with our kids, that we can learn from them. So I think before you have kids, and if that's an expression that you kind of buy into, it's like, yeah, we can learn a lot from kids. But I think when you have your own, or at least maybe the times where you spend a lot of time around kids, whether they are your own or whatever, you babysit or you have family that with young kids, I think that's really where it hits home. And it's like, yeah, like, when we're around them frequently, when we're, when our lives are integrated frequently, and we're doing these, the mundane things, the day-to-day stuff, it's not so mundane when it's a 2-year-old, but that's the stuff that we can learn. So I thought that was so tiny, but so impactful. And then the other huge thing to that was feeling that depleted and going to bed last night at 8:30, choosing to go to bed at 8:30, and then waking up at 7:30, and feeling probably 90% better. Anyone with the flu knows this feeling, but it had been long enough that it was a little bit, I was like, what, how do I feel so much better? Like that's a bizarre feeling, to go from feeling what I'd perceive as like, 5 or 10% to like 90% in the matter of one sleep. It feels so weird. It almost feels fake. Like you just robbed something. Yeah, really, really interesting, huge change within a day. Yesterday, all these things around being a coach came into my mind too. Food was part of it. I'm like, I'm sick, so I know that I need more protein. I'm going to try to get that. So I had some bone broth powder, this ginger bone broth powder from Organic. It's really great. I've recommended it to a few clients. I had that, and that was good for about half hour, and then I threw that up plus some. So I don't think I ingested any of that. Then from there, I had essentially completely lost my appetite. I was trying to eat, but I was just eating like some fruit, and then I ate like I had a popsicle, which I then threw up. I had barely any water, and like this is where my inner coach was coming out. I was like, you feel, you're feeling partly this way because you haven't drank any water today. And I was like battling that, because it was like, I know I need the water. I know I don't perceivably have the energy to go get water. And then I also have this sort of affinity to water in a way, or not an affinity, like like the feeling that you're like the opposite effect when you basically, like when you have water, like you're going to puke. That's what it felt like. I was like, I know I need the water to feel better, but I also know or feel like if I have water, I'm going to throw up. So yeah, safe to say there was some confusion throughout the day, like you do when you have a flu. Tried to have water, ended up having some Gatorade. And then later that day, after watching like 4 hours of TV and like thinking about this while being with my son, being like, I'm not letting him Like, I'm not okay if he watches TV the whole day. I need to get outside with him, even if it's 10 minutes. So that took quite a while to muster that up, but we did go outside. Throughout that time too, like the backache and the rib ache from throwing up, and just the achy feeling when you're sick. It's hard to be playing with a kid and like try to pull it off. It looks really obviously like you're not in shape to do it. But we got outside. I did the best I could. We ended up playing outside for like 15 minutes. I definitely laid on the ground for part of that, and felt like that was the best I could do, which is probably hilarious to see that. But it's all about trying. And that's kind of my experience with this virus. Bree and I both woke up today feeling completely fine, which is, again, like shocking when it happens. You're like, okay, do I need to be like cautious of anything, or am I just like good to go? Mind you, like what I'm doing the next day, this is the next day for me. Woke up, slept an incredible amount, woke up feeling pretty great. The only thing I'm really feeling is like some aches, some like an achy low back and around my ribs, and like feeling stiff, right? And I just told myself, I'm like, I'm not going to just jump into training again. I think today I'll probably choose to go for a couple of walks, and that will feel like enough movement. And that's what I'm going to do today. So, setting realistic parameters up so that you're not trying to kill it. Like, you don't need to be absolutely crushing it all the time. And this is a concept that I've talked to with a close friend of mine, RJ. We talk about this. This is a bigger concept, but what I'm getting at is like not having to always work super hard all the time. So in training, whether you're whatever kind of competitor you are, I'm talking about like general athleticism, or the general athlete, the general kind of folk, general population that are just trying to like get more fit, want to do some training, also have lots of other stuff going on in their lives, have lots of other engagements, and don't maybe generally recover optimally or eat optimally or whatever. So that's a pretty huge population, and I realize I'm being pretty vague there. I just don't want to paint this picture over some athletes that I know that I'm not necessarily involved in the training or whatever. But the idea of like going hard all the time, it's dangerous and it's silly. We have this expression that goes something like, it's not work harder, it's not work smarter, it's work more intentionally. It's be intentional. So with being intentional, the reason I like that expression is because, number one, I thought about it. So as you'll hear in the podcast episode with Tosh, we generally like to skew expressions so that they suit our needs more. And this is exactly an example of that. I was like, I don't necessarily like the idea of work harder. Work smarter sounds good, but I don't want it to be work smarter without the grunt work. Like, I like the grit and the grunt. So work more intentionally sounds like it encompasses those things. So for me, it sounds like a great happy medium. So I'm going to go with that. So being more intentional in training, what I mean by that is, because you're not going to always have to work 100% intensity or 100% effort, what that doesn't mean is that you can't be intentional about something. So you can't have maybe a goal or a direction with training each day. The reason I like be intentional in terms of a framework or a lens for training is that when we assume that we are not going to work 100% effort every day, it allows recovery to build into that, because there is recovery for things, right? Strength training, you're going to need to recover differently from certain strength training than you will certain high intensity training, than you will certain aerobic work, than you will yoga, than you will like whatever it is, an injury. There's different recovery rates with all of those things, and to ignore those is really silly, I think. Especially, again, I'm talking about general population. I'm not talking about freak athlete elite. This is general pop. This is you and me. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably somewhere in the general population. It could still mean you're really fit. You might be a little competitive. but you're not in like the 1% of athletes. I'm not either. So this be more intentional, what it does is it gives leniency to the fact that recovery will have to be in there, and that there can be a different focus other than just intensity. So, for instance, a great intentionality, or a great way to be intentional when the effort can't be 100%. So when, if you just did a heavy strength training session, you're feeling really fatigued, it may not make sense to do, the same type of training, and, then be down on yourself if you can't lift as heavy, for instance, or can't lift the volume. Again, this has to be a little bit general because there's thousands of examples of how this could be different, but be intentional could be a great way to be able to focus on something that you feel like is improving without, feeling like you're failing because you can't go 100% like you did the day before, or maybe it's 2 days and then a day where it's lighter. So having an intentional or having intentionality around things like technique or body awareness or muscle engagement or your breathing or your ability to be present or your ability not to be distracted or your ability to feel, balanced. We can kind of look at the secondary elements of fitness to get some other ideas. Intensity seems to be the main one that people focus on. That's not a secondary component. It's not even an initial or a primary component, but I feel like a lot of people get stuck in I need to go hard or it's not effective. And this is a reason why I'm kind of drilling this point home and trying to give you some sort of ways to modify this behavior, because I feel like it's a behavior way more than it is a training plan. If it was about a training plan, we'd really just be looking at the RPEs, because you could do the same type of workout with different RPEs, rate of perceived exertion, and have a completely different type of workout. Whereas if the intentionality is different, then that kind of lead. Basically, we want the intentionality to kind of always be at the forefront versus intensity. That's what I'm getting back to. Where was I going with that? I can't totally remember. Intensity is not a principle of a primary element of fitness. I was talking about the other possibilities of being intentional. They could be focusing on some of those secondary components of fitness. Agility, balance, coordination, speed, flexibility, I think is one. I think there's 7. I'm just going off the top of my head, but those are absolutely other components that you could focus on. And it doesn't necessarily even mean changing the program. It could just mean, okay, coordination, and I'm going to do the exact same, workout that's planned for me, but I'm not feeling totally recovered. So how can I feel more coordinated for this workout? I'm going to just try to be more engaged in my body. I'm going to eliminate distraction, maybe, right? So maybe I'm not going to listen to music. Maybe I'm not going to have the TV on if I have the TV on. Maybe I'm going to go barefoot. Maybe I'm going to, in between sets, I'm going to think about how the movement felt. Like all of these kind of things. And you can use some of them or you can use all of them. But this is just a different way to get you out of the single lane thinking of more intensity is better and less intensity is not as good. There's lots of different examples, and they kind of all sort of pull off of this idea a little bit. But back to the conversation that I had with my friend RJ, him and I had talked about, being intentional is important, but he would say if I get two really good, high volume, high intensity workouts a week, that's good. And he was training for strongman at the time. And I'm going to have him on the podcast likely in the following weeks. The reason that this is important is it shows that there's growth and that there's maturation with training. if you can be okay with, letting your ego not be the main intent to feed the ego, make sure that your ego is not the main intent feeding the ego. I think that's a really good sign of maturity. From personal experience, I mean, that is something. For the first long time in training, I would always try to go heavier, or I would try to do more, or I would try to do faster. It was like sort of a hyper competitive mindset. And it was kind of like a lot of the things were a grind. So for anyone that's listening, that's just starting out, like, again, you don't always have to go harder. Like, that's not the only way to do something better, is by doing it harder or by doing it more intensely. Intensity is kind of the word I use with training. Again, you can use any of these variations of being intentional. Sometimes the intentionality is going to be to make it more intense, depending on your training. That certainly, for me, that is a time where usually it's once a week, I'll intentionally try to do something really intense. And I don't know, I'm sure there's some science behind that. For me, it's like, I like to remind myself that I can do hard shit. Like that's just important for me to know. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks about me. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm not doing this to post, to show, like, look, I don't need the validation for that. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's something in me that I need to remind myself approximately every week. It's not always every week, but I need frequent reminders that I can do hard shit. And it's probably if we kind of like extrapolate that a little bit, it's probably because I think, society is pretty soft, and I'm definitely a part of society. And by doing hard stuff on your own, it's mainly on my own, that I think it's just a good reminder that by doing some hard shit that you're uncomfortable doing, that is going to have a larger impact on both yourself, how you feel about yourself, your confidence, and how people perceive you in the world, which I think is important to a degree. It doesn't mean you take in everyone's opinion for face value, but I think to be perceived as someone that's confident is a worthwhile pursuit in life. And to also exemplify that you're capable is also, I think, a very important facet in life. So I think that that's why I do, quote unquote, difficult stuff on my own, to remind myself. And I think that sort of reverberates out of me from, time to time. And I think that is that underlying theme of, like, people in general are getting pretty soft, and I don't want to be a soft person. I don't want to be someone that's like, just complaining a lot. And I do complain quite a bit, and I'm working on that. And I think there's times where, like, for instance, like that story I told you initially about throwing up and being like, kind of, maybe not enjoying it, but being like, huh, it's kind of funny, or like just noticing, not trying to ignore or like get past the feelings that are uncomfortable, but just like sitting in them, right? There's so much to even emotion that's so uncomfortable, but part of the processing is just by being present with it, that I've learned in the past couple of years and learning more and more. So it's like, it's not even that training has to be the way to do this. It can be in all sorts of things. I know in my men's group, there's lots of examples of people coming from kind of different walks of life that practice this, this discomfort in different ways. And it's all, I don't know, I think it's all for the same reason, right? It's kind of to remind ourselves, and like to keep sort of practicing that, like, I can do this, I can do this better, and I'm capable. And it's important to be confident, I think. So I think that's a huge, yeah, I mean, we're not even talking about the same thing anymore. It's like, I think that's the beauty thing about training, is that it's almost so little to do with like what we're actually doing. Like training is great. Like, doing something in some type of program to, to get more fit, or to, I don't know, to get more muscle, or to get less fat, or to get more flexibility. Like that's awesome. And as I'm saying this, I'm like, it's almost so not about that at all, right? It's about the, I don't know, well, what is it about? This would be a great conversation to have with someone, so I'm kind of having it with myself. But it's like certainly about routine and consistency. We know that with discipline slash motivation, I have a lot of issue with those words at face value, but with discipline and motivation, it's not about doing the stuff when it feels easy to do, right, or when you're feeling really great. And like, that's not discipline, right? It's discipline's doing it when you don't want to do it. That's discipline. Same thing with motivation, right? People think that they lack motivation, and I think that there are some chemical changes with, or chemical differences with certain people. I don't know exactly, but I think before we get into motivation, it's like, well, what do you believe you can do? And it's working on changing the self-belief that we have in ourselves. Because if we don't believe we can do anything, then just, talking about not being motivated is really like flimsy. It's like, what are we even talking about? We're just saying we don't have this word. It's like, there's no real tangible change that we can make with that. So I think that's part of why I don't like the word motivation, or how we use the word motivation, is we put so much emphasis and like impact and power in it. And I think some people, I think conveniently sort of categorize themselves as people that are not motivated. It kind of becomes this like black or white, like you identify with being motivated, or you identify with not being motivated. And it becomes this like crutch, or this excuse that you can say, like, well, I'm not someone that's generally motivated, or I just have a hard time being motivated. It's like, maybe, and I don't know the answer to this, but I think that it's just convenient if we classify ourselves as motivated or unmotivated. I think that, I mean, this is a pretty big topic, so I'm going to go for a little bit and then I'll switch. I think you're probably doing, well, let me talk about this for myself. When I don't feel motivated, I'm good. Like, I guess that's what I'm saying is, I'm not necessarily going to identify with someone, or I'm not going to identify to either be motivated or unmotivated. I don't know that it's necessarily like yes or no. So I feel pretty disciplined though. Generally, like most days I'm pretty disciplined. Most days I train when I intend to. Notice I didn't say train when I want to, because that's not always the same. I generally do studying on the days that I intend to, which is almost every single day. I have a list right here, right below where the camera is. There's a list of non-negotiables, and it's 4 things that I want to do every single day, non-negotiable. And maybe this is something that would help you guys if you're finding that this topic of motivation is something that you think about. So for me, I wrote non-negotiables because regardless of what happens, essentially, these are things that I want to be able to do. So and no real timeline. This isn't something I check in on. I have different systems for stuff like this, but this is just like, I need to do this. And this is strictly like personal / career. This isn't an extensive list of all the things I want to do in a day, but I wrote that I need to do morning goals. I need to do meditation. And for me, meditation means like 5 minutes. It could mean breath work. It could mean like a traditional meditation. It could mean yoga. It could mean a couple different things. It could mean a walk with like, more presence. Try to keep it a little bit more broad, because I know the feeling I'm trying to get from that. I'm not necessarily trying to do it just to check it off. Because if that was the case, I would write, 40, 50 things on here, because then I would be trying to get the dopamine hit. And then I'd be like, fuck, boom, 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 30 things. Great. I feel good. So it's not a quantity thing. Okay. With this, I've never talked about this. I have different webinars and things like that on motivation and goal setting in a more strict sense. And there's some stuff that's taken out of neuroscience that I think has been really helpful. But this is just my own kind of anecdotal experience with this sort of side goal list. So again, on this list, I have morning goals, which is me writing them down. That's very structured. That's a page of me writing down my goals. And if you were to flip through my notebook, the last like 70 entries are morning, night, morning, night, morning, night, morning, night, morning, night. And it's like almost identical. I even write them in the same order. I find that that's, just more helpful for keeping it flowing. The second thing is meditation, as I mentioned, and that can be in different forms, but I'm trying to get the feeling out of that. That's why it can change. I don't need it to be one thing, or I'm a shit person, or I failed, or whatever. For me, it's like morning goals means, now it just means before noon, because the odd day it's been where things have happened, and it just, I don't know, it doesn't need to be like perfect or it's not good, right? That kind of all or nothing principle, it's not good for me. I don't keep it in my own life because I don't think it's very effective. So as soon as I notice that, I'm like, well, what's the real goal here? I'm like, if I can look through a notebook in the past year and it's like there's 720 pages filled out, and I've done it, like, even if I've done it almost every single day, I'm like, that is unbelievable. That is unbelievably consistent. Most people don't last more than a week or two on something. So even to do it like that and have a little bit of grace, and to be at 90%, 95% consistency, whatever it ends up being, you will get to that goal. So like the outcome, the outcome will occur. You don't, if you have to do something 100% of the time in order for it to work, or it doesn't work, it's, I don't know, there's got to be some type of issue in that. Or maybe you're talking about like some type of fucking science, or like biology or chemistry. Like, I'm talking about training, talking about like personal development and training, goal setting and stuff like that. So this isn't like a universal thing where you can use it and be like, no, here's an example. I'm sure there's examples, but in terms of goal setting and training, do you need to be 100% consistent to get to where you want to be? In the general fitness population, I would 100% say that no, you do not have to be 100% consistent. You could probably be, some people can be 60% consistent and still see great results, and other people need to be a little bit more consistent. And I think that is a huge conversation around other variables like genes and like routine, and like if they're on medication, or predispositions to certain things, or age, or when they started getting into it, or whatever. It becomes more complicated. So I try not to just throw too many generalities out there, or I'll try to explain what I mean by them. The third thing is nightly goals. So it's the exact same thing I write in the morning. It's not any different at all. It's just writing them down again. So I just make sure I write that down before bed. That's it. I usually do it like within the 30 minutes before bed. For me, that's fitting into that time. It usually doesn't deviate from that. So I haven't had to extend a boundary or extend any grace period. And then the fourth thing is studying for 30 minutes. So I have a specific online course I'm doing right now for my training business. So I do 30 minutes every day. And what that might mean is I'm sitting down really focused. And there have been some days where I'm doing the dishes and I have the audio on, and I'm probably retaining some of it. And I'm okay with that, because I'm in like a hyper consistent stage. So there's kind of two ways you could look at it. I could be, it doesn't have to be either of these, but just so you get the example. I could either be 100% consistent and be attentive 80% of the time, or I could be 80% consistent and try to be, present 100% of the time. The chances of me being present every time I do something is not very common. I think that's puts maybe for me, it puts too much pressure on myself to do that. So I try to focus more on just like doing the things consistently and being present as much as I can, and that's what seems to work well for me. I'm sure you could shoot some holes in that, but I really think that that's what works well for me. And I think that's where discipline comes in, right? I don't know that you're always going to feel super engaged in every like single thing you do. Like that's fucking kind of crazy. I think we can learn to be more intentional without being always being intentional about every single thing we do. I think we're pretty soft as a society as a whole. So doing things that can help us get a little bit more disciplined and a little bit more engaged and a little less dependent on things that we're addicted to. And I mean, we're all pretty much addicted to the exact same things. Like I know that if I started taking way more drugs, like I would be a drug addict. I have no doubt about that. And fuck, I used to basically be an alcoholic when I was younger. Not too far from that, thinking about drinking almost every day, and still doing other stuff, still exercising and being social and playing sports and all that. But at one point, we used to drink a couple times a week for like a few years, I think. So there's lots of I know there's lots of people that hear that and can relate to that, but I'm like that is addictive behavior, and it's not optimal at all. Um, Social media is 100% something I need to mention. There's lots of times where I'm scrolling and I don't want to be scrolling, for instance. So there's lots of ways you can go about changing that, but that's 100% something worth noting. Food, a lot of us are addicted to different foods, some more than others, some more types of foods than others. Sometimes it's a habit, sometimes it's a behavior, sometimes it's the emotion with that. Like addiction is not something that I'm trained in. I think it's pretty complicated, but it's really common. So yeah, whether it's like a substance or food or a feeling, or I mean, there's also the addiction around like needing to be perfect with food. What do they call it? Orthorexia, I think. It's like needing to like, yeah, essentially be like counting everything perfectly. The example I use is counting almonds because I worked at a gym quite a while ago, and there's a lot of people doing fitness shows and bodybuilding shows and bikini shows, and obviously they need to get super dialed in. And I definitely can see the amount of work ethic and discipline that is involved in something like that. And I also saw the counting of the almonds as something that is 100% not a healthy approach. So for general population, not a very good route to go. For someone that is pretty aware of the extreme side of it, I think that would be pretty important. Some people come out of those competitions unscathed, and some people come out of those competitions scathed, and like they have hormonal issues and they don't feel very good mentally. And I think that's a lot of work. So I've never done a show like that, and I'm not a bodybuilding coach, and I'm not the kind of coach that's going to prep you well for a physique competition. But just in my experience, I've seen lots of people like that counting the almonds, and it's not a healthy relationship to have. Like, do you really want to, zooming back out, like, do you really want to be the kind of person that has to be 100% on, or they don't feel good about what they're doing? I know I don't, and that's why I've set my life up, and I'm aware of the things that I'm a little bit more obsessive about, and like there's sort of some grace built into that. So like I'm just looking at these four goals too, these four particular non-negotiables, like they're built in that like I can do them. And I'll be truthful, there have been Well, I think there's been one day, yesterday when I was sick, I didn't do any of those things. So yesterday was probably I think it was probably the first day in the last 2 months. So that is so consistent. So 39 out of, or what, 59 out of 60 days. Like that is unbelievable. There was no shame or no guilt or anything of not being able to do that. I thought of it. I thought of like, I'm not doing this, but I certainly didn't think of, any type of negative sabotaging emotions around that. Like there was some other strong priorities and feelings that negated the actual action of those things. So yeah, that's okay. So having some acceptance to not having to be perfect. Like you don't have to be perfect. All right. We can learn a lot from kids, and slash, you do not have to be perfect. If you feel like you have to be perfect, there's probably some other stuff going on. Maybe I'll say that. Well, maybe I just said it. So if you feel like you have to be perfect, zoom out, do some reflection, hire a coach, talk to someone, write these things down, and just figure out like why, like do I actually have to be perfect? Like, am I feeling the way I want to be? Am I looking the way I want to be? Am I performing the way I want to be with less consistency? So is it just in my head? Am I actually like doing well even if I was 70% consistent? Figure that out. Or maybe there's some other things that are kind of working against you. We're going to leave it at that. Thanks for jumping in on this one. That was a real off the cuff episode, and next week I'm going to have some guests on. So thanks for joining. Peace.